Welcome everybody again to another episode of the ideaXme show that profiles the humans behind the really big ideas that are shaping the world, inspiring the future, and future creators. And for all those that like really great stories, I'm Ira Pastor. I'm your health, aging, longevity ambassador along for this journey. Today we are going to be talking about the topics of climate change and sustainability, two topics that have really come to the public in recent months, and as a health person, are extremely important, let's just say, on that list of ensuring all of our health and longevity on this planet in the coming years. Our guest today is Dr. Renard Siew, who is a fascinating person and a wonderful background, really help us walk through a lot of these topics and really give us a sense of where we're going. Dr. Siew has both a PhD in civil and environmental engineering from Cambridge and a PhD in management technology and economics from ETH Zurich. Dr. Siew is a climate change advisor with the Center of Governance and Political Studies in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, which is an interdisciplinary research center bridging the fields of economics, political science, sociology, business, and law. And they focus on the problems and challenges raised by the current political development and economic transformation going on around the world. He is part of the World Economic Forum Expert Network Group focusing on sustainable development in Asia, and is environmental advisor to Sime Darby Holdings, which is one of the larger multinational conglomerates in Kuala Lumpur, focused in areas like plantation and property development. Prior to these activities, he was a postdoc fellow at the Center for Energy and Environmental Markets. He continues to serve as a stakeholder council member, Global Infrastructure Basel Foundation, a global advisory board member for Economists Without Borders, and is the curator of Global Shapers Kuala Lumpur, which is a nonprofit organization focused on creating sustainable impacts in Malaysia. He actively participates and contributes in various stakeholder platforms, including Water for Growth Initiative and the Integrated Urban Water Management Task Force, which seeks to develop a national level water transformation roadmap for Malaysia. He's a climate reality leader trained by Al Gore, former Vice President of the U.S. He was the recipient of many scholarships, the Yayasan Sime Darby Scholarship, the Cambridge Bursary Scholarship, ARG Hermes, Brookfield Multiplex Engineering Management Prize, and the Australian Conference Management Education for Engineers Award. He has been nominated for numerous awards around the world. His work has been featured across a number of mainstream media throughout Malaysia and internationally. Dr. Siew, thank you so much for taking the time today to come on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's a real pleasure. Just to start off, we typically give our guests the floor for a while just to talk a bit about themselves, basically who you are, where you grew up, how you developed an interest both in engineering and economics, and how you find yourself today in 2019, really at the epicenter of this discussion on both sustainability and climate change.
Yeah, sure. So I actually grew up in the east coast of Peninsular Malaysia. In this small town called Kuantan. And, I remember very clearly growing up near the coastal area, we were often inundated with very severe floods. So personally, I've had to move, to be relocated from one place to another, especially during the monsoon season. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking to myself that at that very young age that, hey, this just doesn't seem quite normal, for, someone in his childhood to be moving from one place to another, almost every single year. Mm. And the adults that I used to have conversations with around me would often say that, floods happen all the time. It's an act of God, and there's nothing really that do. And I suppose being the rebel that I was, I was quite adamant about wanting to find out a little bit more about different climatic patterns, So, I eventually went into the field of civil and environmental engineering and started diving a lot deeper into environmental issues, studying about different climatic patterns. And I would say that it was through my formal education that I've had my first foray into, this whole concept of climate change. and really understanding that a lot of the changes in weather patterns, it's really anthropogenic or related to mankind because of human activities, be it through industrial processes, being involved in different plantation or different economic activities. Like we just contribute so much to emissions into the atmosphere. And just recently there was a report that states that about 11,000 scientists worldwide has really rallied behind, and agreed that climate change is real, responsible for quite a broad range of disasters that we're have observed. So we're not just talking about, severe floods like in Southeast Asia, but also droughts, forest fires, and a lot of these extreme weather patterns used to only make up about 0.1% of our entire Earth's surface. This was back in the 1950s, but that number has already increased by about 14 times more, which means that it's 14 times more likely for us to be seeing such extreme disasters happening across the world. And what that really translates into is that we're going to be seeing more suffering, and mass migrations, like climate refugees, especially in parts of Asia, because of severe droughts and floods. So farmers, fishermen in my country, will be severely affected. And I guess that also leads back to why I'm doing what I'm doing currently. Having grown up in such an harsh environment, I've always made it my personal mission to, want to make a change in the space, to really, I suppose, educate and raise awareness, among the public, be it policymakers, governments, or even different civil society organizations here in Southeast Asia, about the importance for us to, get behind climate science and start working out innovative solutions before it's late. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. I've heard you talk, and we've corresponded a little bit offline, and one of the main things that you mention is this concept of future-proofing the planet. Obviously focusing on this, keeping global temperatures within this 1.5 Celsius critical change mark that a lot of people are talking about. Obviously the world is a big place. We have the sky, we have terrestrial biomass, the oceans. Could you just, obviously, I don't want to ask you for a long lecture on these different things, but could you tell us sort of what because obviously Malaysia, you have all of that going on. You have the oceans, surrounding. You have a large amount of rainforests, pristine, different climates and environments. What are the most crucial areas that you are looking at specifically from this Malaysia perspective, looking at sort of these different, I'm going to call them sinks, let's say carbon sinks or resource components? What are the sort of the critical things on your list for future proofing moving forward? What do you take your time to spend most on as sort of those critical mission issues?
Yeah, so one of the key areas that I'm currently looking at here, locally, is really on this concept of climate adaptation. Okay. So because seriously speaking, based on the Paris Agreement that has happened, I think there have been a lot of countries that have got together and said that, we've got to limit temperatures from increasing by 1.5 degrees Celsius, beyond which, extreme weather patterns such as floods, droughts, and forest fires will further intensify. But in Malaysia specifically, we haven't actually talked a lot about climate adaptation, what would actually happen in the event that temperatures are soaring and increasing up to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, when we are actually faced with real disasters. Are we actually prepared for such scenarios? And the answer is actually no. It's about time that we really start working really hard, and we're talking about adaptation from really an economic perspective as well. So Malaysia, for example, we're very much dependent on the agriculture sector.
Mm-hmm.
With palm oil production being one of our largest exports.
Mm-hmm.
But the harsh reality is that with severe droughts that have been hitting us, like agriculture use are being affected quite severely. And palm oil is just one of the many crops that are being affected. There's also rice and corn, like
Mm-hmm.
maize. All of this different crops make up about 2/3 of human caloric intake, and it's one of our biggest exports. And they are actually on a projected huge yield decline by about 7% year on year because of different climatic changes. So how do we, adapt to such different scenarios? I think there needs to be a lot of research, like on crop resilience.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be new technology that is being introduced, like to make sure that we'll be able to continue to increase production, like year on year, because
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, we are going to have to find solutions in order to feed humanity. Like population is increasing at an exponential rate,
Mm-hmm.
and hence food supply needs to increase as well. Like otherwise you're going to have like mass starvation, like, and quality of life like continues to drop.
Sure.
So a lot of efforts are currently focused on the agriculture sector. That's one. The other thing is also about current property and infrastructure resilience as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's another area that we are currently looking at. So the situation in Malaysia is quite unique in a sense that we're not just affected by floods, but there are also water security issues. So just to give you an example, in one of the states called Selangor, like near Kuala Lumpur,
Mm-hmm.
like just 5 years, like 5 years back, like it was actually hit with one of the worst water security issues. And it's also very related to the whole climate change phenomenon, because climate change causes this phenomenon known as intervariability of rainfall.
Okay.
So this whole idea that areas that used to get huge amounts of rainfall no longer get as much rainfall as they used to. And we have a dam in the middle of the state, Selangor, which basically acts as a reservoir, like
Mm-hmm.
to collect rainfall, like,
Sure.
and it's one of the main sources of water supply. But because rainfall patterns have been changing year on year, so the dam has actually been drying up. So in 2018, like just 2 years back, citizens of Selangor were severely affected. Can you imagine turning on the tap in the 21st century and there's literally no water coming out of your taps?
Mm-hmm.
So it was hard heating. Like a lot of residents like had to literally queue up for emergency water supply that came from an external tank. And this is crazy considering the fact that you're talking about Malaysia, like
Sure.
where we only have 2 seasons in a year, like rain and sunshine. And yet, like hundreds and thousands of people were actually affected as a result of this phenomenon. And I can say that this is merely the beginning. It's just going to get worse from then on. And the fact of the matter is, like, we haven't actually thought about adaptation as much as we should have. So how do we increase, or seek out for other water supplies, apart from rainfall, in order to
Sure.
meet the demands of our citizens? So these are just some of the, many different projects that we're currently working at, which also relates to the work that I've been doing with the Water for Growth project, like in Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
Considering that you need water pretty much for every single thing, for not just for drinking, washing, or your day-to-day, initiatives, but it's also a huge and important economic resource. Like, so different industrial processes actually use huge amounts of water. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that, thank you for that. And that actually brings me into my next question, because you mentioned obviously the need for water in the industrial sense, and I think of the sort of transition to this topic of sort of large industry. And normally we obviously have this discussion about climate change and sustainability. I sit here obviously in the U.S. and people always will talk or about sort of the large polluters, or whether they're the fossil fuel companies that are dumping large amounts of carbon in the air, whether the fishers that are pulling all the fish out of the ocean, or obviously people burning down rainforests and what have you. You had a very interesting opportunity. Obviously you've been able to do a lot in recent years, but you have this role in advising a very large company in Sime Darby, which obviously involved in plantations, on sustainability. And I'm just very interested in getting your feedback, because it seems like we need more Renard Siews at many of these companies. What has that experience been like when you're dealing with, obviously, a giant conglomerate that is involved in, on one hand, plantation development and the sort of the major components of this terrestrial carbon cycle. What has it been like for someone like you to come into a large enterprise like that with your ideas? Have there been surprises? Have you been happily pleased by response you've gotten? Tell us a little bit about that part of your journey.
No, I think that's a really good question. I think when I first went into Sime Darby as a large conglomerate, I think the idea was to really relook and reevaluate some of the core businesses within the conglomerate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there was definitely an appetite by the board to say that, hey, we want to move into something that's more sustainable, because it seems to be trendy at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, when you start looking at the businesses that it was involved in, palm oil, which is often related to things like deforestation,
Right.
Construction and property, which deals with, earthworks, like where you're kind of, using heavy equipments like to move soil and different earthworks around. Then you're involved in the motors industry, which is one of the largest emitters of carbon through
Right.
cars and pollution. So the real question was, how do you redefine and make sustainability real? So there was obviously a lot of debates and discussions like among the team to say, how do we make it real? Like, and there was definitely a need for a transition from where we were to what we wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process as well, like one of the things that we did realize was the importance of being in the ecosystem, like, and partnering like with quite a broad range of stakeholders. So we're not just talking about like civil society organizations, but also people in the government. So the political landscape like needs
Mm-hmm.
to change, especially with the different policies that are being enacted. It occurred to us that it was important to sort of pluck ourselves like in the conversations that have been happening, like at a government or national level, especially when it came to the enaction of new policies relating to waste or water management, which is one of the things that has been actually lacking like in this part of the world. So a lot of the policies that have been enacted were sort of, like 30,000 feet above ground. Governments or senators actually agree upon. But when it comes to implementation, this is where like most organizations fail, because they don't understand or it's been too late. So there was a lot of that, like there was a lot of need to push, to be out there, to be involved in the ecosystem, to help drive the agenda. And also there was this realization that you're not a single the only entity that wants to achieve sustainability. There's sort of a broad range of people and different industry players as well that you have to work together with in order to make this work.
Mm-hmm.
Sustainability at the end of the day, it's not a one person's journey. Like
Sure.
You have to work with your stakeholders, and that has always been the mantra or mandate that we have adopted. Yeah.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Moving from large companies now to sort of the area of entrepreneurship and small ideas, small companies. Obviously, we see quite a bit on the advocacy side. Greta Thunberg and a lot with the protests that are going on everywhere. One thing that I find that equally exciting, and I think we should see more of sort of what's going on at the really small level on the entrepreneurial front. We try to profile a lot of that on this show. We've had different guests. We had a wonderful young man, Fion Vieira from Portugal, who recently won the Google Science Fair Award. 18 years old, coming up with innovative ways to take microplastics out of the ocean. We had a gentleman, Scott Cattell, who is a local professor here in Philadelphia at Drexel University, on what it takes in a city like Philadelphia to green it, or to begin the process of taking this 300-plus-year-old city and really bringing the green back. So I love these types of ideas. What are you seeing on the entrepreneurship front, both in Asia and elsewhere, where we can really encourage the younger minds, the ones that are inheriting this planet from us, to really, the advocacy is great. At the same time, get involved in the science, get involved in the technology and engineering, as you have, to create some of these new solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that I've been advising youth and millennials is obviously not to just be involved in, like climate activism or protesting, but also, you need to be able to equip yourself with the necessary tools and knowledge to be able to offer innovative solutions in order to help, address this crisis at hand. And I think specifically in Southeast Asia, like we have actually seen the rise of social or eco enterprises, which has grown by leaps and bounds, really. In Malaysia specifically, I think there is this agency like called Magic, which really provides a platform. It's sort of an incubator which sort of supports youth like in really innovating solutions that are aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. So, a little bit about the SDG, about the Sustainable Development Goals, like they were, agreed upon by 193 member countries in 2000. And it cuts across quite a broad range of challenges, from the need to end poverty, to address climate action, to promote sustainable cities, to promote gender equality, and so on and so forth. And what this entity, Magic, has done is that they have actually been successfully incubating like youth solutions and help, like provide mentorships like to this group of youths in order for them to test their ideas and validate their enterprise solutions. So like we have seen really like innovative ideas such as enterprises that are involved in their circular economy, like where they're converting waste and upcycling them into higher valued products. We're seeing youth like from universities really innovating and working on like low carbon emissions, like or zero emissions type engines. So I think in the next couple of years, like in the foreseeable future, I think we're going to see a lot more of such ideas really coming up to the fore. Like really disrupting like the way that businesses are currently like being conducted. So we're going to see a lot more disruptions that are happening at an accelerated pace, for sure.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Moving now from sort of some I guess the engineering question too, but it goes something to your economics hat now. A couple of years ago, you wrote a paper I have here. It was in the Journal of Financial Management, Property and Construction. It was entitled "Assessing the Readiness of Sustainability Reporting Tools for an Age-Friendly Built Environment." And it was a fascinating paper, that which I could process, but I wanted to get into this topic because one of the things that I work on this show is the topic of longevity and biotech. And we spend a lot of time on the fact that with technologies, or just with what's been going on, we are moving average age and lifespan forward on this planet on all fronts. Whether it's cardiovascular disease or cancer or Alzheimer's, solutions are coming, and average lifespans are going to shift, but we have a growing population all around the world at the same time, and these issues. talk a little bit about sort of some of the work you've done on the aging front in the context of preparing for this, whether it's 2030, 2040, where we're going with this expanding population and an expanded aged population.
So I actually started working on the on aging population issue because I used to, I was actually living with my grandma at that time, like, who's an octogenarian, like, you know, she was 88 at that time. And I've just remember quite clearly seeing how her confidence has eroded from someone who was, you know, really confident, like, who was very comfortable being with her friends outside. And then the moment she hit, like, hit the 80s, like, she started, you know, like, removing herself. Like, she started, you know, she has literally stopped going out for fear of her safety and security. Like, so I remember, you know, like, having a conversation with her one day, and I just realized that, you know, like, the cities that we have currently are just not built for the aging population. So for someone who doesn't have very good eyesight, like, you know, such as my grandma, crossing the road, you know, like, it's for her, it's like running a sprint or a marathon, like, you know, if it's you know, within to 30 seconds. So I think our cities are just not built to cater for the needs of this particular demographic. And this actually, you know, like, spurred me on to start to, you know, like, looking at, you know, like, what are, you know, like, property developers or even the government actually doing in order to design cities that are age friendly. So, you know, I think it was at a time when, you know, there was a lot of talk about the need for green buildings and infrastructure, and there were a whole plethora of rating tools that had emerged as a result of this. For example, there was LEED in the US. There's a Green Building Index in Australia. So I started looking at all of these tools and looking specifically at the principles and in terms of what is it that they're trying to get property developers or city developers to design or promote. And I realized that a lot of it was very focused on environmental sustainability, but the social aspect of things were clearly left out, specifically in terms of designing cities for the elderly population. So, so the paper that you have mentioned was really about, you know, highlighting, you know, like, the huge gap that we have, like, like, in terms of understanding what the needs of the elderly population are and trying to integrate it into the design of our current cities. In the process of that, I actually ran this living library social project. And the idea behind it was really to gather around a pool of elderly people to act as books, to share about their experiences of the challenges that they face in this 21st century as an elderly person, and to capture, you know, like, what are some of their challenges and how do we actually solve some of the problems that they're facing. Interestingly enough, that project, Living Library focusing on aging population, actually caught up with the media, like, in over 24 countries. It was covered by the World Economic Forum as well, and I think it was basically the first movement, like, in terms of trying to pressure city developers or mayors in cities to start looking at aging population as an issue that needs to be addressed in the next, you know, like, 20 to 30 years from now, because even though Malaysia is a relatively young country, but by the time we hit 2030, like, we would become an aging population where at least 25% of our entire population would be 65 years and above. And with that as well comes with new sets of challenges. And once again, it goes back to the whole question of, are we ready to adapt to this whole scenario? Like, you know, how are we going to continue to support the elderly, like, from a financing perspective? Like, are they going to, you know, like, just retire? How do we further integrate them back into society? Like, what about things like public infrastructure that we have for them from a healthcare perspective? You know, like, infrastructure from our cross lights to, like healthcare facilities, like are they actually sufficient for
Mm-hmm.
this group of people? So there are a whole range of questions that we need to deal with, and we need to we actually need to start asking the right questions now. And the later that we act, the window for acting, like gets smaller and smaller. So there's real urgency for us to, really, put our act together and start doing something about it now.
Absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't agree more on that one. That's that's very. You paint a very elegant, picture there on the importance of this, because as I say, a lot of times I talk to people on the sort of longevity technology side, which is, it's a wonderful area and a lot of great discoveries coming. But as you point out, those populations, there's only one planet. We're all going to be on here, and we have to make sure the built environment and everything that we have here is ready for it, because it's coming. Whether it's just natural or whether it's technology, but it's coming, and we need to keep our eye on it. So that's a great point. Renard, what's next for you? I mean, you're so young. You've done so much already. What's happening for you the next 5-10 years? What are your big plans? I'm sure you have a lot on your list, but what are you going to be doing, and what are you most excited about in the coming years?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really about, like helping to build up capabilities, like in Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of feel like, like this whole concept of climate change and sustainability is just picking up in Southeast Asia. In other more developed countries like the US or Europe, it's sort of, like business as usual. But here in this country, I think there's so much more that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, you see me plugging myself into, quite a broad range of ecosystem, because I feel like there's so much that needs to be done, but, like time is really running out, like that, so I've recently taken up sort of this role, like as a climate change advisor with the Center for Governance and Political Studies, or CENGPS.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the main reasons for that is because I felt that I could really influence, an upcoming climate change act that will be enacted in Malaysia in the year 2020.
Mm.
And if that works out well, I think that would be the first. We would probably be the first country in Southeast Asia to actually have such an act, and hopefully then to like scale that up and share that with other with our other neighboring countries as well. So I think I'll be focusing a lot more on that, and also to support the startup scene, or as I mentioned earlier, the eco and social enterprises. I think especially among youth and millennials, I think there are a lot of great ideas, but at the end of the day, it's really about putting those ideas into practice.
Right.
And as long as I'm here, like I want to like just continue to be a support to this youth groups,
Mm-hmm.
or millennials as much as I can, and just to share with them like different resources, like well perhaps you could introduce to me some people that you've met who might who are willing to mentor some of these kids. So I'm trying to build up a platform here, like to help ensure that some of these ideas gets implemented. Yeah.
Outstanding. I really appreciate all your words, and it's you're not just focusing on what's happening now, but you keep coming back to the youth, coming back to entrepreneurship, and realizing that we have issues to deal with now, but we have to train this next generation. This next generation can obviously complain, or they can protest, but at the same time they need to pick up some of these ideas, these technologies, and move forward with the future as well, because it is their world, and it's very important that they have, I would say, that full, as you do, that full set of skills and capabilities to understand what is required in the coming years. I think that's really great. I just want to once again thanking you for taking the time, but really, as we say on the show, moving the human story forward, and everything that you do and that you've really put all your life effort into. And for those, obviously, once again, watching, and for those that are going to be listening on the various radio networks, we've been joined by Dr. Renard Siew, climate change advisor at the Center of Governance and Political Studies in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, part of the World Economic Forum expert group on sustainable development in Asia, and environmental advisor to Sime Darby. Renard, thank you once again for taking the time, and thank you for everything you're doing, will continue to do in this grand story, which is about this little blue ball floating around the sun and all of us. So really, thank you for your time today, and thanks for all of your efforts.
Thank you so much for having me.